Thank you. Good morning to members, officers, press and public attending this corporate parenting panel. My name is Councillor Stephen Rowe. I'm chairman of this panel. Vice Chairman Councillor Cleo Periton-Williams is also in attendance. Can I remind you that the audio-visual feed of this formal public meeting is being broadcast live via the County Council's website, and with this in mind I would like to welcome members of the public to watching this live. There is no fire drill planned this morning. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, we need to leave the council chamber through the rear doors and leave the building through the reception into the front car park, where we need to wait for further instructions. Before we proceed with the formal agenda, may I remind you that your mobiles, laptops and iPads should be on silent mode. We'll now move into the formal agenda. Rob Close, do we have any apologies, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Apologies received from Councillor Kelly.
Thank you very much. We don't need to do a vote on that, do we? Yeah, that's great. Item 2, minutes of the meeting of the panel on the 10th of March 2022. This item is to confirm the minutes of our previous meeting can be found on pages 3 to 10 of the agenda pack as a correct record. Can I ask for a proposer and a seconder, please? Proposed by Councillor Whittington and seconded by Councillor Haigh. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. That is unanimous of the people here. Item 3, declaration of members' interest. Do any members wish to declare an interest? Nope, fine. So we go on to item 4, announcements by the Chairman, Executive Council and Lead Officers. As Chairman, I have just to say that we do have a light agenda this morning. However, I would still ask everybody, officers, when presenting, to summarise the key points of the reports and to remind members of the importance of concise questions and contributions. I have no Executive Councillor announcements, and on to Janice.
Thank you, Councillor Rowe. Yes, I've got 2 announcements I'd like to make. As you're aware, at your last meeting, I offered my apologies because we had the call from Ofsted. So that first week we were doing our preparation, and then the second week they were on site. It was a focus visit, and they were focusing on children in need of help and protection. The paper was published on the 22nd of April. I'm absolutely delighted with the findings, and I hope you don't mind. I'm just going to take a minute just to read the headline findings, and then what I will do is share this with Chiara, and she can circulate it with the minutes so you can have sight of the whole document. But the headline findings are: children are supported highly effectively to make good progress. Strong relationship-based social work practice underpins all of the local authority services. This approach ensures families receive the right help at the right time, with a clear focus on the needs of children, evidenced throughout planning and interventions. This ensures a strong focus on progressing the life chances and the reduction of risk for children. Social workers know their children well and speak with great warmth about them. Experienced and committed senior managers have continued to provide inspirational leadership for children's services. The children's services also benefit from stable and experienced political corporate leadership. Services for children have remained a high priority throughout the pandemic, and resources have been protected and enhanced since the last Ofsted inspection in 2019. Overall, there was no recommendations. There was a little bit of a challenge around our public law outline, which we'd already identified and were working on, but in terms of that being an issue, it's not really a concern. So absolutely delighted. I think it's a great credit to all of the staff that work in children's services that you can receive that sort of feedback about the work that they do with the most vulnerable children and young people in the county. So that's Ofsted. Just on another note, we had a bit of good news again. Paul is going to talk you through the Reg 44 reports, and they relate to our homes. You'll see that in December, Haven Cottage sadly was graded requires improvement to be good. Took a dip from an outstanding judgment. We've just had the inspector back in this week. She's done her 2-day inspection, and she has judged the home's provision to be good overall with elements of outstanding practice. Obviously that is subject to quality assurance, but again, just wanted to reassure you that despite that little dip, we've worked really hard and turned it round really quickly. So thank you for that, Councillor Rowe.
Thank you. I would just like to congratulate everybody and say thank you for everything they've done, and I'm assuming I'm speaking for all the panel. Yeah, superb. Yeah, thank you. So we now move on to item 5, Regulation 44 Independent Visitors Report. This item is on page 11 to 36 of the agenda pack and invites the panel to consider the annual report on the Regulation 44 Independent Visitors Service. I'll just read the next bit, which would come later normally. The panel is invited to consider the report and seek assurance that the independent visitors are fulfilling their obligations in visiting the local authority homes each month as required and inspecting them against the 9 quality standards as outlined in Part 6, Regulations 43 of the Children's Homes Regulation. This report will be presented by Paul Fisher. Thank you, Paul. Take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Sorry. Right, can everybody hear me now? Yeah. Right. Good morning, everybody. I should just explain that I'm one of the team managers within the Quality and Standards Service, and I have responsibility for the independent chairs, LADO, and the Reg 44 team. So obviously everybody has had sight of the report, so I certainly don't intend to go through it page by page. So all I've done is really draw out the positives and the challenges for the homes throughout this last year. And I think one of the things that the Reg 44 inspectors would like to draw out for your attention is really the voices of the children that come through within the home environment. Now, as you can imagine, this takes different forms within the different homes, whether it's children with disabilities, whether it's mainstream, whether it's the secure unit. But one of the things that they found consistently within the homes over the course of the year is the fact that actually each child has a voice in a different and separate way, and the homes are very good at drawing this out from the children. The children are accessing education in a variety of ways. Now, that may be mainstream school, it might be through virtual schools, it might be through some of the work that the homes themselves do in terms of that general education that you would expect from any parent to undertake with a child. And again, that was very positive. One of the things that can't be reiterated enough is the positive engagement by the staff with the young people. When we go in, when the independent inspectors go in and they see the homes, one of the things that they report on is the feeling that they have when they go into the homes. How does it feel? How does it look? What do they observe in terms of those interactions with the children? And it's very positive. You can genuinely see the care of the staff for the young people. And obviously this is reciprocated by many of the young people. Some of the young people, it takes a bit more time to kind of come around. But we do observe that genuine care, whether it's physical, whether it's emotional, or that kind of support. The ongoing development of the work with children, obviously, you know, I won't go through the range of social pedagogy work or restorative justice, restorative conversation work that they do, but each young person has a file, and it's very clear from those files that work is done with the children either around things that they need to address or want to address, or things that's been identified either by the home board or by the social worker or by the school. So again, there's that ongoing work. Again, work with partners, so that's the schools, social workers, parents, independent reviewing officers, LADOs. The homes work very well with different agencies in terms of the care of the children. And we get positive feedback from the partners. So one of the things that we do as the independent Reg 44 inspectors is speak to partners, speak to parents, speak to schools, all of those people, just to really make sure that what we're seeing is what they're saying as well. And again, there's the usual grumbles as you would expect sometimes from parents or things from schools, but these are quickly addressed by the homes. So again, it is very positive. And one of the things that I would just specifically like to highlight is the transitions to adult care. And we don't particularly like focusing on one home because they all do very, very good jobs. But one of the challenges this year has been through the Beacon, getting the transfer of children into kind of adult care. And they have been absolutely exemplary in terms of challenge and moving those children on. So it's really a special note for them. Challenge-wise, across the homes there's been challenges in terms of recruitment of permanent staff. The senior lead for the residential estate, Maria Cowan, has been doing work and coordinating for all homes recruitment of staff. However, one thing that can be said is that they have consistent agency staff in place, so the young people are seeing the same staff members day after day. But obviously it is an issue for the homes, but they are progressing against that. Consistent recording, we see some really exemplary recording with the systems that they have in place, whether it's the individual care management plans, social pedagogy work, all instant reports. Obviously, sometimes we pick up where it isn't as good and it needs to be addressed. However, again, overall we would say it's good, and when it's flagged by the Reg 44 inspectors, it's addressed very quickly, so we don't have concerns about that. And then obviously the other challenge is really just the individual home-specific challenges, whether that's around the individual challenges of children and their particular behaviours that they have to manage, and how they work with the child, parents and everybody else to kind of get the children on even keel, or whether it's around the standards that we would identify where they need to make improvements or enhance provision, or whether, as Janice has noted, whether it's in relation to Ofsted inspections. But again, we're always confident with the homes that they are trying their utmost and they're addressing these issues. So in terms of that, we don't particularly have any issues on any of the homes. So I don't know if any of the councillors have any questions at all.
So yes.
Thank you for your report. We were told previously, or we have been told previously, that there were some issues within the homes of 15, 16, 17, possibly 18-year-old young adults placed in our homes from out of county, but there's no mention of that. Does that mean that as an issue is not an issue, or has it gone away? Or
yeah, no, we don't have out-of-county placements in our homes. All of the children within our residential estates are from Lincolnshire. I don't think there's anything. Is there anything you want to add, Janice?
If I could just expand, I think what you're referring to is independent residential provision. What Paul is talking about is our provision. So you're absolutely right. We do have challenges. There are private providers that exist in the county, and they do place children from out of counties, so they could come from anywhere, England, Scotland, Wales, and they do bring challenges, some of them in particular for the community. But what Paul is reporting on today is the residential estate as it belongs to you, the council. So hopefully that's answered your question.
can I just clarify? So we have no issues in our estate with young adults. It's sort of testing the boundaries. It's purely a visitor issue in other provision.
What I would say is that our young people in the homes are the same as any teenagers in terms of challenging behaviour. So I would say that that's perfectly normal. And one thing, again, just to kind of go back to the specifics, the individual care management plan that each home has in place for that individual child is reviewed regularly, both in terms of progression of the child, but also if there was any incident to take place. So if a young person started getting angry or had to be restrained or whatever, then that would be reviewed with them and with the social worker in order to look at how that behaviour can be managed, de-escalated, prevented for in the future. So we will always get management issues with young people. But again, I suppose from the report, one thing that we're very confident at is that the homes work very well with social workers. They'll work with police. Obviously, if a young person has gone through the criminal justice system or going through that, they'll work with youth offending. So we're very confident that although you can never say that you can stop any challenging behaviour, the home certainly will coordinate and manage that behaviour as much as possible to try and get that young person back on an even keel.
Thank you. Great news. I might have misread the report. I can't find any reference to engagement in education from our residents. And you'll know that I'm particularly interested in the high NEET numbers we have in looked after children in Lincolnshire. And it would just thrill me if you said we've got 100% engagement in education in our residential homes. That would, I would hug you. I probably would actually, because it would be brilliant, because it means we're doing that part of our job really well. I wonder if you can give me an update on that.
In terms of the exact numbers, and I think there's a difference between mainstream and obviously different education provision, which I'm sure you're aware of, and you're clear about that. So they're not in education, employment or training. Obviously for young people within the children's homes, as well as Rowston and kind of Denton, all young people are encouraged to go into education, and the staff work with the schools or virtual schools or providers wherever that young person is kind of registered, to encourage that young person into education. And often they'll take action within the home to not to make it bad to stay within the home, but to make sure that actually it's not beneficial for them to be in the home. So recently I've read the report from Albion Street, where there's a young person that's struggling to go into education, and one of the things that they're very clear about is that actually they don't have access to the electronic equipment during the day, so they're not going to be on Xboxes, they're not going to be on phones and things like that. They're working with the school in order to encourage the young person in. They're getting the school to come into the home to speak to the young person. So I think if it was 100% in mainstream education, then to be honest, I would be giving you an equal hug, to be fair. Realistically, it isn't going to happen. But I think from our inspection point of view, we're very confident that the homes are doing all they can with partners to get those young people into the right provision. And that might be that they work with a school and they realise that actually that school isn't the right provision, and so therefore they look at other alternative provisions that might be more appropriate and do taster days and do work experience and things like that. But unfortunately I don't think I'm ever going to be able to come here and say it's 100% not in NEET.
Save the hug. Is it possible next year to include a paragraph on educational performance, attendance, anything like that, so that we absolutely can be clear that that's part of the commitment of care? Thank you.
Absolutely. I'll make a note to put that in for next time.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, I've got one or two things I wrote down here. First off, flexibility appeared in the report quite a bit, and I just wanted to thank the independent visitors for their flexibility to ensure that we had physical visits. And also I read about the flexibility of the staff to help cover where we were short. So it was just a big thank you. It's great to hear that everybody was working together. Not that we expect anything other than that. There was a comment about members' visits. That is something that now that the COVID has relaxed, and I don't think we're quite getting so many incidents in the homes, that we will get on with. And I have asked that visiting members that aren't on this panel get the report for the individual homes that they're going to. There was also a comment about anonymous feedback by children is varied by each home. I was interested in the information around that first, please.
Yeah. as I described in the report, that the children's voice in the homes comes through essentially through a variety of mechanisms. So that would be discussion with the key worker, it might be discussions with the members of staff, it might be through chill and chat meetings, so it's home meetings that they have. Obviously it can be through social workers, it can be through the independent advocates, it can be through the IRO. So there's lots of different ways that children can have a voice in terms of directly speaking to somebody in regards to what's working well or what they have concerns about or what they want to change. But sometimes what some of the homes also implement is an anonymous feedback mechanism. So for some homes that works well, for other homes it doesn't work so well. And so it can be incredibly varied across the home. So as you would expect, for some homes, such as the children with disabilities, that realistically an anonymous feedback form for them isn't going to work because obviously of the communication difficulties anyway. For some of the homes they've tried anonymous feedback forms, it's worked to a degree. Sometimes it's worked less positively depending on the young people, because of course it's got to be in an area where young people can post it in or put it in without being seen or kind of it being flagged or whatever. And as you can imagine, for some homes where they've tried it, young people have ripped it off the wall. For some homes where they've tried it, some young people haven't bothered doing that because they felt comfortable or happy in terms of expressing their concerns. So it's kind of varied across the homes. But again, as I said, I'm confident with the homes in terms of the mechanisms that they have in place in the homes and around them, that all young people can have a voice in terms of what they want to say, what they're happy with and what they're not happy with.
If I remember rightly, at the big conversation at Spalding, it was the last one, there was one of the children was saying it would be good to have an independent person that they could speak to that maybe wasn't that person attached to those. And there was discussions about that might be somebody who had left the home, or it was all sorts of things. I wondered if anything had progressed along that line.
I'm not aware of that from the big conversation, to be honest, the specifics around that. Obviously, each of the homes have an independent advocate that goes in and speaks to the young people. So I'm not quite sure, to be honest, I'm not quite sure what the big conversation was wanting above and beyond that. I don't know if, Janice, you're aware of anything different.
Yeah, I was there, and I think what we were exploring was the idea that they might have a mentor. So Ben was going to go away and they were going to do some more work with the young people around what did that look like, what did it feel like, who would it be, and I think you've probably just had the invite to the next big conversation, so hopefully we'll be able to have an update there.
That'd be great, thank you.
I think Paul just would be cited on that.
Councillor Court.
Apologies for my lateness, Chairman. Unfortunately, well, fortunately for the residents of the A15, they have got the highways teams on 2 stretches, despite leaving Stamford well over an hour ago, and as well as being on Red Line Square as well. Just on the engagement piece that you brought up and just expanding on it. So I suppose in terms of younger people, are we actually asking them about how they want to engage with us, not just sort of saying, well, here's a form, can you fill it in, or let's have a chill in, a coffee chat, whatever they are. Are we actually engaging with them in terms of what they'd like to see in terms of how they engage? And I'm not saying we then offer incentives, because obviously we don't want to say, you know, have a free afternoon karting, but by the way, can you tick the good box on everything? But I'm just interested in your views.
No, that's fine. The young people are asked how they want to engage, certainly within the homes, in terms of residents' meetings, and some young people opt out of those residents' meetings and want to give the views in kind of different ways. I think one of the things that all professionals are always mindful of is not consistently asking young people the same questions and annoying them, because young people get asked a lot of questions by a lot of professionals. So if you can imagine just in a young person's life, obviously they've got every single person within the home that looks and asks them questions. They've got people from schools in terms of education. They've got the Regulation 44 inspectors come in and ask them questions. They've got the independent advocate comes in and asks them questions. They've got the social worker come in, ask them questions, IRO, and the list kind of goes on and on. So I think we are always mindful in terms of not overloading young people in terms of consistently asking the same questions, because essentially this is their home. So we tend to take the view of, obviously, if it was your own child, you might ask them the question a few times, but then you'd leave it, because otherwise you'd get, for God's sake, mum, dad, will you just leave it alone kind of thing. So again, we're very confident that the homes themselves engage with young people individually, but also collectively in terms of how they want to express the views, how they want to engage in any kind of process, decision making around the home. So yeah, we don't have any concerns at all about that. And again, it's very much dependent on the age and ability of that young person as to how they're engaged.
So I've got another question, and I don't know where I've heard this answer before, but if I have, I can't remember. Why do we split some siblings?
That's a big wider question. Obviously, because we manage, I manage along with my other colleagues, team managers, manage the independent reviewing officers, and obviously that comes out of the care plan. So there can be a variety of reasons as to why young people are split between different homes. So one of the examples that I will give, and obviously I won't name names, is that we had two twins. Obviously there is two of them if there's twins. we had some twins in one of the same homes, and basically they could not get along. And through the assessments, through the work with the social worker, the independent reviewing officer, and obviously with them, it was determined that they would be better off separated in different homes, which has occurred. And for both of those children, they've absolutely thrived, because again, from their point of view, there's not that competition, there's not that sibling rivalry. They've become an independent person in their own right. So for them, it's very clear. So as you can imagine, none of the decisions in terms of splitting siblings at any point within that child's journey within the care system is taken lightly. It's very much based on the assessments of the young person, that collaborative working, the work with the children, giving them their voice in terms of what they want and everybody else, before the decision is made to split. But in some circumstances it is needed, because obviously what we need to focus on is the individual care of that child. And yes, we look at them collectively, but we need to make sure that that individual child has the best care possible. And unfortunately, sometimes that may mean that that's not together in the same placement.
Okay, that's my questions done. I found the report quite informative. Oh, sorry, Councillor Whittington.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. This is something that came out of the discussion. We're talking about various people who go in the homes, whether it's independent visitors or whatever, for individuals. I'm just thinking about, for a child, these may find it hard to differentiate who all these particular people are, and may disclose something to one. Is there any way the responses to all of these people are triangulated, just so nothing is kind of missed out? Because a child may say something to one and then not necessarily make the same point to another person going in. I'm just thinking that the concerns might be missed. Thanks.
Yeah. What I would say is, obviously, clearly, if there's a child protection issue, so a child discloses any child protection issue, obviously anybody that goes into the home has a duty to disclose that and raise that as a concern. If it's just generally around how they think or how they feel, certainly obviously the Reg 44 officers provide the report and they would feed back to the homes. However, it would be the same for any person going into the home. So obviously the advocate, some of the things that obviously the young person may say in confidence, and that's one of the reasons why they have advocates there to be the child's voice and to kind of listen to them, may not be passed on. But obviously each person would make that determination as to, okay, the home may need to know about this. What's the young person actually saying? What's that kind of feedback? I think what we're very conscious of is that it can be about the number of people going through into the home and what engagement the young people have with them. Because as you can imagine, it's, and again, back to basics, it's that child's home. So if they're going to disclose, they've got to have a reason to disclose in their own mind, or they've got to have a relationship with that person. And one of the things that we're kind of very keen on, and again, the chair's mentioned it in terms of council visits, is that there's that consistency of person. Because if you go back to your own home, if your children had various random people tramping through the house asking them questions, we would always say, well, what's their reason? Why would they engage with you? You've got to give them a reason. You've got to build that relationship, because otherwise you're just another random person in their home. So that's why we always say that, you know, children need to build that relationship, but equally the person they're building a relationship with has to acknowledge that actually they're part of a greater whole in terms of the care of that child. Does that make sense?
Okay, thank you. So, as I was saying, I found the report quite interesting and as a good background. I personally have arranged, I've got diary appointments to go around all the homes now, but totally informal, hello, it's me, my education, if you like. But it was good to be able to see it from that point of view. Or see it, yeah, you know what I'm saying. So, the proposal, I move that the panel receives and endorses the report. They are satisfied with the activities undertaken by the independent visitors and the assurance provided. Just to add that we would like to see some feedback about education in the next one. Can I ask you to raise your hands if you are in agreement, please? And that is unanimous, thank you. So we now move on to item 6. The Independent Reviewing Service Yearly Report, 1st of April 2021, 31 March 2022. The panel is invited to consider and comment on the annual report on the Independent Chair Service and endorse the priorities for 22-23. Once again, it's Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'll, if people are happy, I'll do a similar thing, because obviously you do have sight of the report, and again, just to draw your attention that it's a combined child in care, child protection report. So when I've looked at the positives and the challenges, I've particularly focused in the child in care, because obviously it's more relevant for this particular forum. So in terms of the positives from the Independent Chair Service throughout the last year, obviously we've kind of come out of COVID into the government's roadmap of kind of post-COVID world. And I think one of the things that's been working really well and the team have been progressing is the new ways of working through teams, hybrid meetings, face-to-face meetings with children and young people. And that's worked particularly well in terms of contact with young people. So again, as you can imagine, the young people that we work with across a range of ages, some of them are happy to see their independent reviewing officer in person. Some have prefer a telephone call. Some are happy to have an online chat. But I think one of the things that the team have worked really hard on is how the young people want their reviews to take place and how they want to engage with us as a service. And as you can imagine, for some young people, that takes a different form. For obviously the younger age group, pre-verbal, realistically for them it doesn't matter, so it's around the professionals, how do we engage those effectively. But the young people, for their reviews, are very much in charge of that process, and I think that's one of the things I'd like to flag, that it is their review. Now, some of that reviews, and again, I don't know if anybody's ever observed a review, some of that review for some young people can be particularly boring, because we're talking about certain elements that they might switch off from, or don't want to particularly engage with, or don't want to listen. So we gear them very much in terms of how do you want to have your review. Some of the young people stay for part of the review and then leave because we go on to, in quotes, the boring bits. Other young people want to stay for the whole of the review. So there's been a lot of positive work with the young people in terms of that. One of the other positive things is the kind of challenge and work with social care and partners about the best outcomes for children. So when you was talking earlier, Chair, about the Reg 44 and the splitting of siblings, one of the things that we're very clear of as an independent reviewing service is that we are independent. and obviously, like all professionals, we want the best outcomes for children within the care system. And sometimes that means that there's positive challenges about things that need to be done or actions that need to be undertaken. And we have a very positive working relationship with partners. However, at the core of that, we are there to challenge and ensure that the young person's care plan is appropriate to them and meets their needs. So we do challenge, we do, as it says within the report, create escalations for those more concerning issues that we want to kind of address. And we're very confident as a service that actually those are progressed and these issues are kind of dealt with. The timeliness of the reviews, again, I won't go too much into figures, certainly in terms of the positives and challenges, but out of the 1,694 reviews that we had, 99.77% were in timescales, and obviously there's the reason for the 4 that kind of weren't. And one of the things that we do have is that often reviews need to be changed, they need to be moved, you know, changes of placement, court processes. However, the independent reviewing service is very responsive to that flexibility that we've discussed before in terms of managing those reviews, fitting them in. But also, I would have to say, we don't work in isolation, so it is the partners that's equally flexible and the children and families that's equally flexible when things do need to be moved. And unfortunately, that's just part and parcel of the work. Feedback from children and young people. Again, talked a little bit about that in the Reg 44, but we have consultation documents going out to young people prior to the reviews. We speak to them prior to the reviews. We speak to them in between the reviews themselves, as well as at the meetings, to get their feedback in terms of not only their care package, how it's working for them, how they see their lives, but also is there anything that we could be doing different as a service. One of the things that made me laugh the other day was that we had feedback from a young person that in terms of what we could do differently, and they wanted to go to Manchester United pitch, they wanted to see a game, they'd like a Manchester United kit as well, and strangely enough they also wanted a Paris Saint-Germain kit as well. We did all query in terms of where's the loyalties around that. So young people, although clearly that might not be relevant to his, well, it might be relevant to his care package, might not be relevant to his review coming up, but it kind of does indicate that we try and get young people's voices, we try and see, and if they want to say about their Manchester United kit, and I just have to say, one of the officers did often offer to take them to a Sheffield United game, which went down like a lead balloon, to be honest. That wasn't taken up by the young person. But we do want that voice, whatever that voice is saying. And we want the partners and everybody else in that young person's life to be able to hear that voice. So that's one of the things that I think that we feel that we're kind of very good at. Again, we talk about feedback from parents, we contact parents, we contact carers, obviously we work with foster caring, obviously Debbie's here today. So we always work with our partners in a collaborative way, but maintaining that independence, as is our role. In terms of the progression of the priorities from last year, again, I've touched on the hybridisation of meetings, moving more face-to-face kind of meetings, which has kind of worked well. And you'll see some of those priorities from last year, although some of them are kind of child protection, have moved into this year's priorities as needing ongoing work. So the priorities reflect the ongoing work that we've been doing to ensure the high standards and also address any identified or kind of emerging issues. Challenges. So this is the bit that obviously we have a challenges of the system and how, as an organisation, how we're trying to address it. Excuse me. So one of the things you may have pulled out from the report is staff retirement, recruitment and release of staff to other areas within children's services. However, one of the things that we've been very fortunate at, and I suppose we'll say we're good at it in terms of recruiting agency staff that are of a high calibre and actually very stable. So we do have agency staff within the service. However, the majority have been with us for nearly a year now, and actually the standards that they're bringing are very, very good. So there hasn't been a loss for us there in terms of kind of staffing. You know, the kind of elephant in the room is the rise in the number of children in care. Again, 682 in April 21 to 731 in March 22. And obviously that has a commensurate number of reviews. So 2021, it's gone up to 1,645. One of the things that, again, we'd flag, and obviously Janice kind of briefly mentioned it, was drift and delay in courts. That impacts in terms of if there's delay in the court process. Obviously reviews have to be rejigged. Obviously for social care they need to produce those reports. We have to read those reports in a timely manner. And obviously again, the primary focus is the care of that child and getting matters resolved as quickly as possible. But again, it's that work with the courts, making sure that wherever possible things are dealt with in a timely manner. And again, in terms of that, the changing reviews and having to move them, if a young person changes placements, again, we have to have another review, so a kind of to ensure that that placement's appropriate and correct. But again, as I said, we don't work in isolation. So if, say, there's a breakdown in a foster placement, I know from the work that I've done with Deborah Crawford and her team about the disruption meetings. So why is that placement broken down? And that feeds back into not only the ongoing care of that young person, so is there anything that needs to be managed differently, but also obviously in terms of working with foster carers and about how they approach care of young people. So, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but obviously we don't work within isolation, we work within a bigger system that I think as a service we're very good at engaging with, and partners are very good at engaging with us. Yeah, the rearranging of reviews, I've just got a figure of January to March this year, we had to rearrange 225 reviews. And again, it is just that impact in terms of that. So there's some of the challenges. Obviously, the number of cases is always a challenge because we have the same number of staff, although we've increased our capacity within that through some agency staff. But like any organisation, you know, show me somebody that isn't incredibly busy. But I would say that as a service, we're responding to that effectively and making sure, again, that the person at the core of this is that individual child, and that the service promotes that effective care for that young person.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chairman. So obviously on page 41 of the report, I think just to give you and your team, you know, congratulations about how you've managed to adapt during the COVID pandemic, and obviously the work in terms of how you've pivoted, how you used to do those participation sessions with children and families that really need you. So I think, you know, congratulations to you and the team. I'm sure that's echoed by everybody here on that. You've already mentioned in terms of the children in care population and the upward trend and how that's impacting. And I suppose I know we're not in a post-COVID world, or however you want to define it politically. As we leave COVID behind us, or don't think about it, do you expect us to see that trend continue to go on an upwards trajectory as some of the impacts from, I suppose, the last 2 years start to come to the front? And then what are the comparisons in terms of other counties and what their effect is in terms of, are they also seeing an upward trend as well? That's my first question.
I'm going to dodge that one and hand over to Janice, to be fair, because I think I can talk about our service, but the wider trends I think is more Janice's purview.
Thank you, Councillor Cook. Yeah, so on your first point, we have, as Paul's described, we've seen an increase of our children in care population, and part of that has been over the last 2 years we haven't exited children from care in the way that we would normally. I think, you know, I mentioned our public law outline. I'm not sure you were here when I talked about that earlier. And the challenges of the courts. So obviously court capacity is a massive thing. It's a massive challenge for us. And what we have seen is that young people haven't had their care plans ratified by the court in the way that they would normally. And therefore we've got a bulge in the system. So children that should be adopted, children that could possibly go and live with relatives under what we call a special guardianship order. There is a number of those, and we are tracking them actively with the court. The court have absolute challenges that are unprecedented around capacity. The judges are as probably struggling as much as we are around social work. It's a profession that is really struggling, but they are very live to it. We're working very closely with the courts on that, and we have strongly introduced what we call the public law outline and pre-proceedings. So we're not taking children before the court. We don't take children before the court unnecessarily, but we are averting children going before the court in a much more robust way than they would have done previously. With regards to all other local authorities, yes, we have seen the same. They have experienced the same challenges that we have. What I would say is that even though our children in care population has grown, it's measured per 10,000 population. So our last reported figure for the 903, which is what we have to report to the Department of Education, was 49 per 10,000 population. Our statutory neighbours, which is another benchmark measuring, is 54 per 10,000, and all England is 63. So even though we have seen that increase, what we have seen is that we are still managing to keep our children safely at home in their communities. And I am hoping over time, as court capacity increases, that we will start to see our population reduce.
Just to follow on there, because obviously you mentioned about capacity, and obviously with a continued increase, presumably that is putting more pressure on your team, and I suppose it is how much capacity have you got before it starts to become a bit of a pinch point, and then you have to look, I presume you're constantly monitoring this in terms of interim support in the marketplace as well, and I appreciate there's not a whole plethora of people applying for jobs at the present time.
Absolutely. I think for the first time in Lincolnshire, for the first time for a very, very long time, we are experiencing some staffing challenges that we haven't. If we kind of passported back to January, we were in a much different position to where we are now in May. There's, obviously people have come out of the pandemic. There are more opportunities for social workers to work for agencies. That's not something we've experienced, but we're very live to it. We are monitoring all of the services. We've got papers that we're drafting that we will be taking forward for some solutions about how we address that. But at this point in time, we are still delivering our services safely, but it is a challenge. We have to be very mindful that staff are carrying additional work for a whole host of reasons, and that they're fatigued. But absolutely what I would say is that they are really committed and really dedicated to the support that they give to children and young people. I was fortunate to spend a day, I want to say yesterday, but I think it was Tuesday, in South Holland. There was a big locality gathering of all the staff, and their morale was really high. Again, as I say, we're circulating the feedback from Ofsted, from the focus visit, and again, they were very complimentary of the staff and the commitment and the support that they give to the children. But you're absolutely right, we are experiencing challenges we've not faced previously, and we're very mindful of them.
You should definitely come to South Stephen. It is the best bit of the South Lincolnshire, in my opinion, on that one. So in terms of the Child Protection Conference escalations, and forgive me if I get this wrong, so I suppose it's a bit of forward thinking in one sense. So in terms of GPs and how they're escalated, I mean, if you look at how GPs work now compared to what they used to, so I use the example of earlier this year I went skiing, I busted my ankle, and I was interrogated by the secretary at the GP practice before I even got to a GP. I suppose now more of the GP surgery appointments are going online. Will that potentially put some children at risk because the GPs aren't physically seeing them in person, so they don't actually see the whole context of some of the challenges they're experiencing? Do you know where I'm sort of coming from in the sense of will GPs be able to raise an issue if they don't physically see the child?
Yeah, I do. I understand what you're saying. What I would say is probably our safeguard is our health visiting service. So unlike many local authorities, we insourced our health visiting practitioners in 2017. So they actually belong to public health and they work for us in children's services. So they are our eyes and ears on the ground. They're a universal service and they obviously visit all of our children that we're concerned with. So if we've got children on a child protection plan or a children in need plan, they will prioritise those children. But there are and there will be some children that we don't know about. I'm fairly confident that the children we know are seen when they need to be seen, and we will arrange medicals for them in hospital if we need to. We're quite forceful with GPs and can be. Social workers are a force to be reckoned with when it's their children. But there is potentially a risk for some children in the community that we're not aware of, but I'm fairly confident that our health visitors would pick that up, and they've got really good relationships with their GP surgeries. So it's always a risk. I can't know what I don't know.
Councillor Matthews.
I want to take my hat off to you because you're living in a very bureaucratic world, aren't you? And I'm actually struggling to see the difference between the first report and the second report, but I'm going to plunge in anyway. Good report. You're clearly doing a good job in difficult circumstances. There's one paragraph that shouts out to me, and one single word in that paragraph. Page 49, there are 2 supported living schemes, one in Grantham and the other in Gainsborough, providing accommodation for young people aged 16 to 18 for a period of up to 6 months. The accommodation is to be inspected under the Regulation 44 process. However, this is a light touch exercise every 4 months. Is that a typo? Have we been inspecting this provision? And if we have, please can you give me the update on the education engagement of those 2 16 to 18 year supported living schemes, and tell me how the inspection exercise, which is light touch, is tracking that. If they're only there for 5 to 6 months and we're only inspecting every 4 months, these children can drift away.
Okay. Yeah, that is a typo in terms of that. The Rowston and Denton are the homes that you're referring to, and they are inspected by the Regulation 44 inspector, so almost going back one report. So in terms of that, it is what we call a light touch, because obviously they aren't regulated in terms of Ofsted, so the care standards that we measure the other homes in relation to, I won't say don't apply, but technically don't apply to Rowston and Denton. However, the inspections that take place by the Reg 44 inspectors look at those care standards and how they're applied to Rowston and Denton. But obviously, because it is a supported living accommodation rather than a regulated home, it's slightly different in terms of that. And obviously for the young people there, it's very much more geared towards independence. I can come to Andy Morris, my colleague here behind me, if you wanted a bit more insight in terms of the education provision. But again, what I would say is that from a Regulation 44 point of view, again, the homes work with the young people. They have a lot more autonomy in terms of obviously what they do and how they do it, but they still have that support network around them. And one of the things that we would say with Rowston and Denton is that the young people aren't just left to their own devices. There is work with them around education, around independent living, around making positive choices. But I'm not going to put Andy on the spot to suddenly tell you exactly how many are in education, but I will refer to him for any further information.
Can I just come in before Andy does? I think what I just want to say to you is that, as Paul's described, it's not a regulatory requirement to undertake Reg 44 visits on supported living accommodation. What I asked them to do was give me that additional assurance by replicating the process. So it's an add-on, and therefore what I get is a similar sort of report that comes for Royston and Denton, which gives me some assurance of the quality of the care that the children are receiving at that time, albeit it's not for a long period of time, but we don't want any issues to emerge. Quite interestingly, the government have now decided that they will regulate 16 to 18-year-old supported lodging accommodation. They don't know what that regulation looks like just yet. We have been working with them to help them try and understand what that might need to be, but it is an additional safeguarding assurance process that isn't required by law. So it's kind of an add-on, if that makes sense. So I think light touch is probably a bit unfair.
Yeah, I can come in. I've got 4 young people in each home at the moment, okay, and 3 in each of those homes are in education, employment or training at the moment. Actually, 3 in Rowston are in education, and the 4th one is employed. So that's really positive. And I know that one of those young people the other day, the taxi didn't turn up for his school, so he sat on the driveway cross-legged until somebody sorted his taxi out because he wanted to go to school. So it's really positive. We've got high numbers of young people in education, employment, training there. And as Paul says, we had a Reg 44 visit yesterday in Rowston, so that one was undertaken. And as Janice said, we're looking at what the regulations are going to look like in, they're saying maybe May 2023 when the regulations are going to come in. And the government have also already agreed that they're not going to call it children's home, they are going to call it regulation of semi-independent living, because they recognise that the independent living requirements for 16, 17-year-olds are very different to those of 5-year-olds. So I can update the corporate parenting panel when they come in and we know what they look like, but at the moment it's still at the consultation phase.
Thank you ever so much. Can I ask that we change the text in the report to reflect the better position than is represented in the report? Because clearly you're on top of that, and that doesn't suggest that you are. And say how good this is, because I'm still reeling from the fact that we've got reported, 1 in 2 children not in education, employment or training, and it's clear that we need to update that figure if this is true, and I have no reason to believe it isn't, that actually we're in a much better position than we're having reported for our children in care in need. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Whittington.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I think part of what I was going to raise, I think, was covered in the questions that Councillor Cook raised in terms of the increase in the level of activity, and Janice provided sort of reasons around less children accessing the service. But I'm also looking at it from those children entering the service. I mean, because at the moment, obviously, we're in difficult economic times. Does that have an impact upon the number of children going into care? I mean, families that are under pressure anyway, financial difficulties, economic difficulties, might exacerbate problems that are already there and result in children coming into care. Because for me, obviously, we're on the sort of an uphill trajectory at the moment. Now, I get what just people are saying, that it's a temporary blip. But obviously my concern is that it's not, and it's actually moving up to a new plateau at a higher level. So, and then potentially what the impact that's going to have on resources. I'm thinking not only of financial resources, but I'm thinking in terms of what resources we've got as a team, because I know we have pressure attracting foster families, and I know that post-COVID an awful lot of quite a number of established foster carers decided that they were going to exit and retire. And I know we've got some recruitment campaigns to try and increase the number of foster families. So I'm just, it's just having a bit of surety around not only financial resources, but also resources in terms of, have we got foster families, and also the impact upon the staff as well, because obviously they've all got increased caseloads. And I'm not saying, there's anything, but what does seem to be, whenever you have these child reviews into these appalling cases happen from time to time, one factor that seems to be fairly common in all of them is that things slip through because of social workers having huge caseloads that they were struggling with. Now, obviously, I'm not saying we've got any of those in Lincolnshire, but it does seem to be a factor in most of these, when these reviews happen. So just a bit of reassurance around that, I think would be quite useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whittingham. I think what I'd like to say to you is that, yes, absolutely, it's a really challenging time for our families at the moment. And we will bring children into care where they are at risk and they can't be protected in their family network. So we're very clear on what constitutes risk, and we will bring children into care if it's the right thing to do for them at the right time. So I'm not experiencing at this point in time a massive increase because of socio-economic reasons. We are working really closely with our families, and we do, because thankfully we've come out of the pandemic in as much as we can build family networks again. So, and that was part of some of the challenges that we ended up having some children come into care previously that we wouldn't have. So again, we've got those resources that we can mobilise around them. You're absolutely right. Our foster carers are a godsend to us. Deborah will speak for that. And we are actively recruiting them, because actually for us, if we have to bring children into care, we would like them to be in a family environment, and hopefully that would be with one of our foster carers. As you know, I've talked to you before about we're increasing our residential estate, and again, that's about, we have seen throughout the pandemic a situation emerge that we've never experienced previously, is where we were sending our younger children into residential provision out of county, and we're addressing that. We've got the additional resources, and they will go live. We will move, hopefully, if all goes to plan. Strutt will move up to Wickenby and we'll call Strutt in June, July, and Robin House will open as our new residential home for our 6 to 12-year-olds. We're in the process now of working with those young people that we've identified, just going through the recruitment. We've had massive applications for people to come and work with us, and that will be a multi-agency approach to that particular provision, which will filter down through to the residential estate. And with regards to staff, you're right, it is challenging for them. We have, you know, we're really good at recognising the difficulties they have and obviously offering support. We've got a really strong wellbeing service that all staff are aware of and they can access as they need to. At this point in time, while it is challenging, we're not seeing our caseloads increase considerably. What we are seeing, the challenges around capacity rather than the increase in caseload. So there's a bit of a twist there. It's not the same as other organisations, but it is something that we're really mindful of. And just to give an example, in Deborah's service, what we have done is we've redeployed some early help workers. So they're supporting the supervisors and social workers, and they can go out and actually do some support to foster carers. And those are some of the plans that we've got, again, in the frontline service where there's some difficulties around recruitment. We've got early help staff that are supporting the teams. So we have got contingency plans in place. We are actively recruiting across all of the service areas, but, you know, as I described earlier, it's an incredibly challenging time. And we're very alive to that. We are looking at what we can offer that makes Lincolnshire the best place to live and work. So I hope that covered everything that you were asking.
I've just got a quick question. You mentioned that we've had some of the agency staff that have been with us for sort of a year. Have you asked them to stay?
We have. Strangely enough, we had one agency member of staff, would be a couple of years ago now, that liked the organisation so much that she wanted to stay, and she was successful in a role, and she still lives in Sheffield. So it kind of demonstrates the level of commitment that she has in terms of actually this is a good place to kind of work. Two of the other agency members of staff, actually both have said that they would love to stay, but they don't want to relocate from where they live, which is Kettering North Hampton way. However, in our one of our most recent recruitment drives, we had quotes from one of them, Keith, because I won't say he's so enamoured with Lincolnshire and the service, but he was absolutely adamant that this was a great place to work, and the service that we provided and the support and within children's services was great. So we do ask, but unfortunately, as Janice has said, that there is a lot of agency staff out there, and obviously for some people, agency is more positive for them. For others, less so. But yeah, we do try and poach people when we can.
Councillor Higgs.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of questions, Paul. The first one goes back to the twins, but it could apply to any siblings. Where they're separated, do we bring them back together to meet on regular basis? I realise that in the twins' case, they don't particularly get on well together, but my concern is that at a later stage in their life, they could come back and one of them could come back and say, we were separated and that's destroyed a little bit of my upbringing. So that was the first question I've got. The second question is, if there are staffing issues, are there any standout reasons why recruitment is so difficult? Is it because the salaries tend to be relatively low, or is it restricted to geographical areas and it's easier to recruit for some centres than others? Or is it that sometimes I have to stay overnight? So those are my questions anyway, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you. The second question, again, I'm going to go over to Janice, but I'll answer your first question first. I think the second question more because obviously it's wider than Lincolnshire, and clearly Janice has a better understanding and insight into the wider national picture rather than my just Lincolnshire kind of view. In terms of the twins or any siblings, yes, as part of each young person's, regardless of whether they have siblings in care, what that looks like, they have their individual care plan. And obviously, part and parcel of that is contact with any and all family members. So for the young people, even if they've been split in terms of going into different homes or different accommodation, different providers, whatever it is that they always look at that young person, both in isolation but also together in terms of, okay, what's the family network around them? How do we ensure that that's kept if it's appropriate to keep? How do you keep that contact? How do you keep it positive? Because clearly one of the things that nobody would want is to force children back together and have them fighting like cat and dog and just never wanting to see each other again, because that's not productive for them in the short term and it's not productive for them in the long term. So that's always managed, and again, as I said, it's within that multi-agency setting of the kind of child in care review. Obviously, sometimes it can be inappropriate because there's harmful behaviour or behaviour that actually one child doesn't need to be exposed to. Obviously, we also need to acknowledge, as you quite rightly pointed out, as children carry on throughout their life, circumstances change. So what might not be appropriate one day might be appropriate the next, and vice versa. And obviously, for a lot of young people, when they leave the care system or as they kind of get into kind of 16, 17, often want to reconnect with family members if that hasn't been available. So we need to acknowledge that as a service. So how do we actually manage that effectively? So no, it's a bit of a movable feast in terms of it may be appropriate for them to have been separated at that point. At a future point, it may well be suitable for them to live back together. But that's a very managed way of doing it, in the same way that splitting children between accommodation is very managed and it's very thought out. So it's always under consideration, it's always reviewed, and obviously, again, going back to one of the other points is, we're also very clear about the voice of the child in all of this in terms of what do they want. Now, we might not be able to provide them exactly what they want, but we're very clear that we're listening, and how does that inform the decision making? Does that answer your first question? I'll let Janice answer the second one.
Thank you. There absolutely is a national shortage of social workers. It's a bit like foster carers, there's a national shortage of those. And we are in a different marketplace to where we were probably 3-4 years ago. There has been a growth in agency staff, which we've always had agency staff, but actually it seems to have become the choice of role for some people that it wasn't previously. So there's a younger generation of social workers obviously coming through the system. They perhaps don't have quite the same values that some of us who've been here 40 years have, and perhaps just don't have that loyalty to be wedded to one local authority. And therefore their market opportunities to go and work elsewhere for higher rates of pay it's quite considerable now. It's something we are lobbying nationally. We, as a region, are doing a piece of work, and we have written, because I think we needed something similar to address this particular challenge, like the NHS have. So it's capped. So it almost is name your price. So I could go to North East Lincolnshire tomorrow and I could get £45 an hour. I could go to Doncaster and they'd give me 50. I could go to Rotherham and they'd give me 55 and Northampton might give me 60. So that's the market we're in competition with at the moment. I would say for us, and just to reassure you, that whilst we are experiencing some challenges, they're nowhere near the challenges of other local authorities. We have seen our vacancy rate increase from Q3 to Q4, but we are hoping that some of the measures, the longer term measures that we've put into place will start to bear fruition. So we will see, we've got a scheme called Grow Your Own Social Workers. This year we will see 10 of them qualify and they will take up posts. We've got that scheme on a rolling programme. So, you know, we will continually train our own social workers and hopefully, because we've given them that investment, and they are usually our experienced early help workers, so they have family here. That's the other thing, it's a much more mobile workforce. People are not wedded to areas in the same way in communities that they were. So it's a whole raft of challenges and issues, but we are working through those. As I said, we are developing proposals that we will be bringing to, you know, the Director of Children's Services. She's acutely aware of what's happening. She's very supportive of the staff. There is no short, quick solution.
Thank you, Janet. One of the follow-up for that is, do we offer part-time? Because it seems to me that one of the great advantages of going on to agency books is that you can come in and out of it to suit yourself. And I just wonder whether we only offer full-time jobs or whether in some instances we could offer part-time jobs. Thank you.
Yeah, we have a range of flexible working policies, so we can do condensed hours, we can do 9-day fortnights, I think there's something called term time contracts. We definitely do part-time, absolutely do part-time. I think what we have to be mindful in is that managing of, we have a service to deliver and it's getting the balance, so I couldn't have everybody doing the same thing. I have to have a mix, we have to have a mixed economy of staff. And you know, but we absolutely are committed to keeping our staff, supporting them where we can, and you know, for the majority of them, they are working the hours that they want to work. We rarely turn down a request if it means keeping a member of staff. You know, I think Deborah, you had a case this week, didn't you? You know, what would it take for you to stay?
Councillor Matthews.
Thank you very much. Two things. One's a sort of a well done. The Absent Fathers project, we're really interested to know how that's going, because I pick up concerns from young fathers who feel that they are, the system is prejudiced against them in terms of their supervision, but they don't do anything about it because they're not well placed and they can't. So that's a well done for doing that. It's really important. I think they're becoming victims without actually having to do anything, or maybe because they're nothing. The second thing is page 51, and this is about secure accommodation. This is conflating two things: the Ofsted comments on the secure accommodation education in your previous report, and this one. And this is just the human part of me saying, of the 6 young people subject to secure accommodation, 5 of these are young women with complex trauma histories who require specialist psychological input and therapeutic environments. Now I'm thinking of my recall of the secure unit. What are we doing to support that single male occupant in a quite a stressful environment for them anyway, but surrounded by 5 women who have complex psychological trauma needs?
Okay. As you probably aware, Councillor Matthews, that Lincolnshire Secure Unit has a mix of welfare and criminal justice. So it wouldn't be one lone male young person surrounded by 5 girls, and that would be it, 'cause obviously it's an 11-bedded unit. So and also those young people wouldn't necessarily have been there at exactly the same time. because obviously in this report it's talking just primarily or just solely in relation to those that have been accommodated on welfare grounds. I think one of the things that I would say about Lincolnshire Secure Unit, and again it's kind of dipping back into the other report as well, is that Lincolnshire Secure Unit, in my view and in the inspector's view, and obviously Ofsted as well, is excellent. And it's excellent because it has a fantastic group of staff within it that work with the young people directly as key workers but around them. It has psychological interventions on site, it has health interventions on site. So it's acknowledged that whenever a young person has to go into a secure accommodation unit, it's a draconian act. That's what it says within the legislation. It is a draconian act and must only be made under certain circumstances, because depriving of a young person of the liberty is obviously a significant event. So therefore, when they're in the secure unit, there's lots of work that's done with them in order to work through their behaviour, review their behaviour in terms of what can be done within the secure unit to manage that, to look at strategies that they can use to de-escalate and make positive life choices, but also how that carries on out into the open, into the community, because obviously nobody wants a young person to be safe and secure just in the secure unit for a very short period of time, and then as soon as they leave, those same issues re-emerge or they're there. So it is very much a kind of integrated approach. And I think one of the things, the reason that it's highlighted in the report is that it's predominantly young girls that do end up in secure accommodation under welfare grounds. As you can imagine, it's predominantly young boys that they're on a criminal justice kind of remit, and we can't get around those figures. So, as I said, the build-up to kind of going into secure, it isn't that those issues aren't known, that they're not being addressed, but sometimes some things can't be dealt with in the open community environment because a young person is putting their life at risk and risk of significant harm that can't be managed. And unfortunately, that almost needs to be acknowledged and dealt with through the secure unit. I don't know if that kind of answers your question, because you did say about a male resident.
I'm sorry, it doesn't answer my question, but it's a very full and comprehensive answer. And again, perhaps it's the grammar in the way the report is written, but it says, of the 6 young people subject to secure accommodation, 5 of these are young women. Straight away, that says we've got 6 people in secure accommodation and 5 of them are girls and women, and the young women, they've got complex needs. You have said there are 11 places and this is a rolling thing and it's historic. So I just wonder if that could be, if you could perhaps go back and find the words that you've spoken orally, which describe the situation much better, because it does go on to say placements have not been available nationally, so we're coping. So I just think you're probably underplaying the work that you're doing there, and it seems stark. So and I won't feel too anxious, but I just got this idea that in the common room there's 5 young women with complex trauma needs and a young man being beaten up.
No, thank you, and I think it's a fair point. I think sometimes we need, probably in terms of reviewing this report, we need to look at maybe some of the language, because I think sometimes what we do, we write it as if we're talking to each other rather than maybe for yourselves in terms of having a clearer explanation. So I'll make a note of that and take that on board.
I don't think Dave could cope with 5 young women in the common room.
I think we've got to the bottom of it anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whittington.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just to pick on the point about, Janice was talking about growing our own social workers and mentioned the apprenticeship scheme. And it looks like that's sort of currently, in effect, upskilling staff we currently have within the team. But I'm just wondering if because obviously I know that sort of health have tried to address some of their staffing issues by first having a nursing school at Lincoln and then a medical school. I'm just wondering, because I'm not sure what the qualifications are to become a social worker. I know that, because certainly when I graduated many years ago, some of my people who graduated with me went and did social work, and they did a postgraduate qualification. So I'm just not sure what qualifications are required these days. I'm just wondering what mileage we would have potentially to work with the University of Lincoln around sponsoring people through degree courses or postgraduate qualifications, or maybe offering students at the university a chance maybe to work for us during their holidays and that sort of thing, and then maybe hopefully when they graduate or finish their postgraduate qualifications, they may decide Lincolnshire is a really nice place and decide to stay. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, so as I said, we have a range of mechanisms in which we encourage staff to think about working in social care. So just probably if I talk you through them as we step them up. So we've got really close links with Bishop Grot, and they don't do a social work degree, but they do a social care degree. So we do have students come and spend time with us here, and we offer them that arrangement as you just described. We used to have a relationship with Sheffield University because previously our relationship with Lincoln, and I'm going back a number of years, wasn't as good as it could have been, and the quality of this training wasn't as good as we wanted it to be, whereas Sheffield was recognised nationally as a really good training school for social workers. So we worked with Sheffield. We have now come back to work with Lincolnshire, with Lincoln University. They're running a social work degree course. It is an undergraduate course, it is a degree course. And again, so we will be putting our apprenticeships on that. The government also run a scheme called Step Up to Social Work, and I can't remember, Paul might know better because Carolyn manages all this. We have had some successful applicants through that. They've come and spent time, they've done their training, and they're postgraduates, so they will have a degree in a related discipline, and they will do their social work degree. And there is also opportunities for staff to do what we call the postgraduate MA in social work as well. But I think the biggest thing for us is our apprenticeships. They are absolutely critical to keeping that workforce development going. And once you qualify in Lincolnshire, our ASYE, which is your assessed year in supported employment, is one of the best. It's recognised nationally. So it saddens me at times that actually we put our staff through and we give them all these skills and they go off and work somewhere else. But then what I take pride in is actually they're protecting children perhaps in another part of the country to the standard that I want them to protect children here. So there's a whole host of arrangements that we have in place that is designed to help us continue with the challenges of recruiting social workers.
Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chairman. I suppose the point you were raising earlier about in terms of different salaries, you've got it's simple economics, isn't it? It's the supply-demand curve in terms of price determination. So, of course, it's not just for this sector, it's also the same for, I know friends that are GPs now, they work in the locum sector because they'll earn, £100,000 plus. It's just simple for them in terms of what they want salary, in terms of, although some do want that permanent employment and that base. So, obviously, as you've mentioned, apprenticeships, and Councillor Whittington has as well. So obviously, as the County Council, we obviously pay the apprenticeship levy. So I presume some of these apprentices, we are using that level of funding that we are sort of paying and then taking back to a certain extent. So how are we advertising and encouraging people to apply to become apprentices at the county, particularly in this area? I know you sort of touched on it, but just...
So we predominantly target what we call our early help or staff who work in children's services. Oh, apologies, sorry. Yeah, so we predominantly target our staff in early help or staff who are working in children's services who are not qualified. And the reason we do that is because they bring a level of skill that perhaps if you've never worked in social care before, you won't have. So we know that we're getting the highest quality of staff that actually have the skills and the experience, because even being an early help worker in Lincolnshire is a difficult task. You're working with really vulnerable families. And it's not for everybody. And we have seen in the past where we have perhaps advertised just generically, where perhaps people have got through the process but actually at the time and the end of the qualification. We've seen that from the universities where we've not necessarily had apprenticeships, but young people have gone on. You can be a social work. You can do your social work training now at 18. You can qualify at 21, and you come for the first time. You've done your placements, and you come and work in a local authority, and actually you're like rabbits in the headlights. So we don't get that with our own staff, our homegrown. We are at this point in time thinking about whether we look at some of our commissioned services, because again, they will have experience of working with the most complex children and young people. And again, thinking about related discipline degrees. So it's a bit complicated. We have had just this week we had the conversation, would we just go to the market? Would we just put a general advert out to, say, Lincolnshire? And I think what would happen there is we'd be inundated, and the time spent probably going through all the applications and trying to self-select who might be the person that you'd want to do the training would outweigh the advantages of doing that, if that makes sense. It feels really time consuming. We have done it previously, it was a while ago, and it was incredibly time consuming. But it's ever changing, the landscape is ever changing, and it might be that we have to go back to that place and say, actually, there's probably loads of brilliant people in Lincolnshire who could do a social work degree and work for us. But we just finished the recruitment round, haven't we, for this year? So, sorry.
But I presume we are using the apprenticeship levy funding, because for the county council that must, I don't know the corporate side of this council anyway, but I presume that must be millions of pounds that potentially is available for apprenticeship training as an organisation. So as long as we are using it and it's not just being sent back to the Treasury and we're not benefiting from it, I guess.
I think I would say if there's an income source that we can access, we're very good at accessing it.
Okay, Paul, thank you. I think you've worked hard. So the proposal is that we receive and note the report, and that our comments from the discussions as recorded are taken under consideration, and that the report's looked at again to change the wording in a very positive way, I think. Can I ask you to raise your hands if you're in agreement, please? Thank you, that's unanimous. 7, item 7, corporate parenting panel workshop update. This is a verbal update following the corporate parenting panel workshop held on the 5th of April 2021. The update will be presented by Andrew Morris, corporate parenting manager, and Kieran Barnes, head of virtual school. We're just asked to consider the update. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to do a verbal update. The reason being that not long after the panel, I did manage to go on holiday. So I'm sorry, I haven't had time to write that report, but I did get away, which was fantastic. Yeah, we held the workshop, which sadly wasn't overly attended. We did open it up to the Children and Young People Scrutiny Group, but we did have 5 members. And recalling from the picture, Councillor Whittington called in from the Arctic research station. If you remember, it was a very, very cold day. I just don't know what happened that day, but it was freezing cold.
I was freezing. We didn't have the heating on at home, so I just went for a big thick jumper and a hoodie.
We saved the planet. But it was a very positive event, and we spent a lot of time looking at local data, national data, and what I think we did as a group with the members was really kind of drill down into some of what that data meant. And we had a debate about the data locally, how that compares to our statistical neighbours, how that compares to the national picture, and whether Lincolnshire's in a comfortable place or not. And we really kind of got under the skin of what the numbers look like, what our children in care numbers look like, what the numbers in terms of age range look like. And then we dug down into some of the information about what the statutory responsibilities are, and what our local kind of nuances and services look like. And then Kieran really spent a lot of time with councillors talking about the role of the virtual school. And we had the opportunity to look at a couple of case studies and understand the challenges about why we do have fewer young people that are in care or leaving care in education, employment or training compared to the cohort that live in the community with their families. And we talked about particular case studies and the experiences of trauma and the challenges they've experienced, the challenges of older young people coming into care at 16, 17 years old. And, you know, sometimes when they come into care at 15, 16 years old, when they come into care, that's the first time they get into education because they weren't in education with their families. So there were some real positives we were identifying. And I think we got down to some really kind of granular detail there about what the real lived experience of young people was. And I don't think we scrimped on any of the detail and some of the realities of the real challenges that we face. And just really for Councillor Matthews as well, just so you know that I'm looking at the detail today, we're at 57% in education employment training. So we've had a 7% increase in the last few months. But we were talking in that workshop about the success at the margins, that when we do have successes, it is actually about individuals achieving and not just numbers achieving. And when we get behind the numbers and we look at young people's personalities, their hopes, wishes, feelings, fears, their experiences, their aspirations, you know, it's not always for us to tell them what their aspirations should be. And to some young people, work is their aspiration. And ironically, if a 16, 17-year-old is in employment, we can't include that as eat because they have to be in education. So the government tell us that employment for 16, 17-year-olds isn't actually acceptable. It has to be educational training. So we really kind of identify some of the quirks of the system and some of those things we can't round off. And some of the things that we maybe we gave to members to take back as maybe a challenge to central government about how we record some of those statistics. I know, I can't remember the name of the member that was sat here, Kieran, but he was very interested in talking to you about taking some of the issues back and lobbying to say we need to reflect on how we do record this, because employment for one 16, 17-year-old might be the life choice they want. That's where they want to go. And just because in educational training, the local authority takes a hit in its performance, but actually behind that lower statistic, there's an individual success. And then, of course, we went on to talk about the leaving care service and about some of the achievements we've got in the leaving care service and how some of those transitions between the virtual school and the leaving care service have got really strong over the last few years. And Kieran and I are meeting this afternoon on the back of the development day to talk about how we might use some additional monies that I've got working with unaccompanied children, unaccompanied asylum seekers, to boost the capacity within the virtual school, to improve outcomes, educational outcomes for young people. We talked about the post-16, what's the term, Kieran? The additional funding.
Yeah, post-16 pupil premium.
That's it, and how creatively using the post-16 pupil premium. I couldn't remember the term. And you know, so we got under the skin of the detail. We got under the skin of some case studies, and we were here pretty much on time, weren't we? We ran, I think it ran about 2.5 hours, the workshop, and we didn't stop throughout that entire workshop for a break. We spent the entire time talking about issues, case studies, the reality of our young people, and you know, some of the challenges that we face as a local authority. And off the back of that as well, I'm meeting with Thea Croxall in a couple of weeks to look at a specific young person and care leavers education pathway through the learning partnership that's chaired by Councillor Bradwell, so that we're going to look at working with YPLP, the Young People's Learning Partnership, to set up specific education and training pathways in schools and settings and employers to get our figures up even more. So we're constantly developing, and I think it was a well-received and informative event, and I'd be happy to do something more regularly on maybe an annual basis if other areas of the council would be interested about the figures and the performance of our young people in care. And really, I don't know if any members wanted to comment or ask questions or feedback on their experience of the event.
Do we have any questions or comments? Yes, Councillor Whittington.
Just one comment. I found the workshop incredibly useful, and I think actually having some case studies it was actually really useful part of it, because you know we talk in general terms about issues you know both at this meeting and also at the children's scrutiny meeting. So when you actually have some case studies, you actually see it on a personal and individual level how all of this works through, which I think was particularly useful, because you could then start to imagine these young people, you know, as individuals. So I found that extremely useful, and if it was to become an annual thing, I think that'd be very useful. Thank you.
Kieran.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Rowe. I don't actually have anything further to add to what Andy said. I think he's more or less covered it pretty well there. But just on a personal level, one of the young people who was one of our case studies, just to illustrate Andy's point, he has managed to get himself a job. And he has started working in construction, having gone through a transition process with one of our employment agencies, and he started work last week. So that's some good news on one of those really difficult to tackle and kind of hard to reach young people who's actually got a job. So, but doesn't count because still counts as neat, of course. There you go.
It's crazy, isn't it? It's a positive, but it doesn't count. Councillor Cook.
Not to prolong the debate, no, just to add to Councillor Whittington's comments, it was incredibly useful, the session. I know we all enjoyed it, and hey, look, it's quality over quantity in terms of presence.
That was very diplomatic. Yes, Andrew, I thought it was superb, and I think the wider we can spread the message about corporate parenting, what's involved, what lays below it, across the whole of the council, the better. I still know a lot of councillors just do not realise the implications of being a councillor. So I know you agree, and the more we can hammer it through, the better, but with interesting things that engage people, and that very much did. So thank you. The proposal is that I move the panel receives the verbal update on the workshop held, and that our comments from the discussions as recorded are taken under consideration. Can I ask you once again to raise your hands if you agree? Thank you, and then that is unanimous as well. So we move on to item 8, panel work programme. This item on pages 71 to 74 of the agenda pack enables the panel to comment on the contents of its work programme. I will just go backwards one step and say thank you, Andy, thank you, Kieran, which I forgot to do for your presentation. The report will be presented by Chiara.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So this item indeed enables the panel to consider and comment on the content of its own work programme. And as we have now reached almost the end of the first year cycle, in the next meeting, we will have the election of chairman and vice chairman for the year 2022 to 2023, followed by presentations on corporate parenting, children in care and care leaver strategy priorities action plan, children in care performance measures for Q4 2021-2022. We will also receive the living care service annual report for 2021-2022, the legal services end of year report 2021-2022, and an update report on Voices for Choices. If there's any additional pieces of work that you would like to see included in the new cycle, please do get in touch with me or raise these today and they will be captured. Thank you very much.
Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's more of an informal thing, and obviously it depends who's on the committee next time anyway, but I think at the last meeting, especially the workshop, we discussed about actually physically going and seeing some of the assets that we have as a council and going out on site visits. So they're probably not for the formal committee meeting, but certainly underline that as an informal thing to go out on some of the visits. I think we all expressed an interest in that.
Councillor Matthews.
Thank you very much. On page 73 it says items to be scheduled, but it doesn't say where they're going to be scheduled, and clearly issues caused at male-dominated facilities, which we're quite interested in because it's a current, but if it's going to wait another year it won't be current, it will be historic. And I thought it was very interesting what Andrew said about the figures. So it's great that we're up to 15% neat, and then he switched to that lovely counting system and said, but one of them's got a job too. Can we have a Lincolnshire figures breakdown of our young people who are either not neat or are in work, so that because we can have those figures here and pat ourselves on the back, that'll be good. But just to find out what the reality is, because if that's still only 58%, it's still not very good. There must be more than one person in work, I'm sure. So anyway, that's the question for the future work programme, please.
Sorry, did you want to just come back on that, Andrew? Because I think I know part of the answer you want to give.
Yeah, part of the answers is we have our national returns. We have to report nationally on particular performance, and that's what's counted. But I'm sure there's something we can do to have a look at education, employment and training. But the ones that relate to 16, 17-year-olds, we can only affect the figure with that particular quirk with 16, 17-year-olds because the 57% relates to 18 plus, where education, employment is part of the count, so it's currently 57%. There's nothing I can do about that, but with under 18, we can have a look at that and see how many of Kieran's young people are actually engaged in employment, and we can affect that figure there. Yeah.
Do we have any other questions or comments? No. Then the actions at the corporate parenting panel is asked to agree the work programme and identify any items for future meetings, which I think we've done. I move that we note the report and approve the existing work programme as detailed in pages 71, 74 of the agenda pack. And can I ask you to raise your hands if you're in agreement, please? And again, that is unanimous. Thank you, Karen. So that now concludes the business of the meeting. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance. And yeah, bye.